Secretary, please take roll. Present. Present. Present.
Present.
Present. Public communication. Public communication provides the public with an opportunity to address the board regarding an item on the agenda or other topic. Anyone wishing to address the board shall submit a request for oral communications card. Cards are available near the entrance to the boardroom and are to be submitted to the recording secretary. A member of the public who wishes to address the board on any such matter is limited to 3 minutes for one matter, up to a maximum of 5 minutes for all matters. There shall be a limit of 20 minutes for any matter unless such time limit is waived by the majority vote of the board. Members of the public may not yield any time to other speakers. Members of the public may not yield any time, apologize, it lists twice. No board action can be taken. Thank you. Do we have any speakers?
No, we don't.
Item 5, general functions. 5.1 is to approve agreement CT 3933 between San Diego Unified Court District and the National School District for District Environmental Education Program. May I get a motion?
So moved.
I'll second it.
A motion by Ms. Sarmiento and a second by Ms. Lizarraga. Any discussion? If none, please vote.
Item passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item 6, human resources. 6.1 is to approve recommended actions in personnel activity list. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
I'll second that.
I have a motion by Ms. Sarmiento and a second by Ms. Gates. Any discussion? Ms. Dowd?
Yes, Madam President. I do have a concern to share. Okay, so the list was not attached to the agenda. And we were given options. And one of the options was to proceed with the item as posted. That is a concern to me. And I do not want to go that route. The second concern is allowing the employees or the hires and new hires to start work without prior board approval. I believe that would take away from the board's job, actually. That's what we do. So that to me is not an option as well. And I know we do not like to ratify items. I understand that we would like to expedite the new hires. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I know that having worked in HR, I know how important that is. But I do believe that there is another option that we could have posted another special agenda. And as long as we have a quorum, then if some of the members that are not able to come during the day, we could approve it early in the morning. And we could have done it for tomorrow, but now it's too late. So we could do it for Monday, or we can wait until Wednesday. I only would want to do something like this in a dire emergency, if at all. And so I would like to recommend that or I'd like to make a motion, substitute motion, to have a special board meeting and post a special board meeting for this item. Okay. I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
Do we have?
I'd like more information. What exactly happened? The employees have already started working before we voted on?
No, there was an email sent to us, and that the staff listing, the list that we usually get in back of this item was not posted. The only place it was posted, it was on, agenda online. And then it was posted early this morning, which, I know that in the past, we have posted it, with the agenda.
So it sounds like that what you're saying is the item that we usually have attached wasn't attached to it, but we didn't get it under separate cover.
We did not get it under separate cover. We have background information, but we did not get the actual table listing the employees, the new hires.
Unless I'm the only one that received it, because I received this.
Did you receive the attachment where the names of the people being recommended?
Yeah. But it's not under.
No, that's not the listing. That's only for the board.
Okay.
That is not listed on the agenda. The public agenda should have the listing attached to it. That's only specifically for board.
Okay. So by it being posted this morning,
Well, they did not meet the 72-hour or the 24-hour.
so how would we don't want to lose these individuals because it's been hard on gathering to
Yes.
replace these. It's, if we were to have a posting for tomorrow, is that not possible for us to be able to meet? I'm willing to have a special board meeting because I don't want to lose the employees that we have pending.
I don't want to lose anyone either, but I do want this to be done correctly.
So would tomorrow be an option?
The 5 employees, right, that we have listed, well, we don't have 24 hours and.
Could we do it for early Monday morning?
We can just do it Wednesday.
And what was the attorney's recommendation? I didn't get a chance to read it.
The ones that Ms. Donna said, yes, it was to proceed as stated with the item is, or, the other one was to ratify it or to wait, to pull the item and then put it on a separate agenda.
So technically, what we learned from our attorney is that as long as the item is posted on the agenda, the board can vote on it, and that documents attached to it can be changed up until the time of the board meeting. But the public has to receive that information at the same time that the board gets it. So we did post it to the website before we sent it to the board, just to make sure we met that requirement. But that is not our particular practice in National School District. So it really is up to the comfort level of the board, and I hear what you're saying, Ms. Dalla, because it is something that we've always done to be transparent, to make sure that anything that we post, we don't change it after we post it, or we don't add things after we post it. So while technically it's allowed, it is a gray area for us in National School District. We don't do that. We don't ratify. That is also an allowable thing to do, but it's also not our regular practice. So it's something worth discussing with the board and making a decision. And I think, we did talk about it, that any one of those 3 options are okay, and Dr. Hernandez will talk to the employees and let them know that the recommendation would be going next Wednesday. So, if it can't be today, we would recommend waiting until Wednesday with talking to the employees, just to make sure they know that they would start after board approval on Wednesday.
So they won't, I see 2 separate effective dates. One's April 11th and one is April 8th. So you're saying that the one on April 8th will not start tomorrow, April 8th. The one on the 11th, what day is that? Is that
That would be Monday.
Monday?
So we have, line item 1, 2, those would be, those were, set to be April 8th. And 4, which would not be the case. So basically, all of them would be set for Thursday after the board meeting.
That's correct.
I am willing to meet Monday morning or whichever day is possible for us to meet. Because again, I don't want to lose anybody who is interested in working for us based on our practice of this board. So if that's something that you would like to do is Monday.
I'm willing to do either way. I know in the past, the board, many years ago, had requested the superintendent not bring ratifications to us because sometimes they were a lot of money, thousands of dollars, and we did not want to be ratifying that kind of money. This being a personnel issue, I understand how the public needs to be aware. I don't know how the public would be involved in a personnel-related issue, meaning if we voted to hire these people or not hire them, the public wouldn't come and say, no, you can't hire them for whatever reasons. It's not common practice, or it's never been practice that I'm aware of. But just the fact that this is a personnel issue, I would be willing to vote on it and or ratify the vote, and providing it doesn't happen again. I'm guessing this is a clerical error?
Well, vote on it today or ratify, two separate options, so.
I can go either way.
Okay.
I would just like clarification because we had mentioned tomorrow. Is there a reason that tomorrow afternoon couldn't be pulled off? I'm just,
Well, it would have to be
Still-
posted now for a meeting at this hour, at this time tomorrow.
So if we would have it
Okay.
post, if
That's
we were
what I-
to meet it, would be
all
right now.
that was my questioning on that. So that would mean somebody's running around right now. Okay, so it's an hour Monday morning. I'm fine with what the board decides is our wisest move. So,
Yeah, I'm okay with Monday, tomorrow to do it. And just to have our, but my question is, there's any consequences of this, of changing in regards dates? Or not hiring for that part?
So usually when we have the personnel list, we do prepare them for their next steps, whether it's an orientation, if we're classified and certificated, and then we give them a start date, and if there's any shadow days. So that's already been in place. But understanding that the list didn't go on the board agenda, we can always create a new plan for our personnel.
That means a delay, right?
That is correct.
Small delay.
A small delay.
That's
when
something
would
that
they
can be
start?
arranged?
That can absolutely be arranged.
Okay.
We can, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what my question, thank you.
And they would start when then?
Based on our,
So based on depending on the meeting, if we had it on Monday, then they can start on Tuesday. And actually, if you have it Monday morning, they can actually start Monday afternoon. We can get them in
It
until,
doesn't have to be 12 hours?
it does not have to be 12 hours, no. So they could actually start immediately. If we waited till Wednesday, then their start date would be Thursday.
so,
just a quick thank you, Mrs. Della, for letting that out. That's one of those things that I feel like I'm still learning, so thank you for doing that.
so, we have a separate motion to pull the item for a future agenda, for a special board meeting on Monday morning. Would anybody like to second that motion?
Didn't we say Friday?
We may not make it
Okay.
to, tomorrow
Okay.
unless we have somebody working on it right now. It would be until whatever time it's posted.
Okay.
So I'm
Just
not
to
sure
clarify.
that's really gonna be, yeah, it's kind of asking a lot.
Monday morning at what time?
We can meet as soon as 8 o'clock.
But it would depend on what time tomorrow you post it. No, because that would be more than 24 hours,
Yeah,
right? So it wouldn't matter.
Monday.
Yeah, what time do you need to get on the road? Because, we don't want to be so early that the public doesn't have a right to can't participate in the meeting, but we certainly can start earlier than 8 if that will help you.
7:40 allows me to get down to the contract hours on time.
So how does the board feel about a 7:30? It's going to be a quick meeting, so we could do it at 7:30, and that would get you out probably by 7:40.
So,
Yeah, I'm okay on that too.
All right,
everybody's here by 7:30.
tomorrow,
Good?
No,
Monday.
Monday.
Just making
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
I second that motion.
okay, so. So we have a substitute motion to pull the item for a future, agenda on special board meeting for Monday at 7:30 a.m. All in favor, or please vote. Okay, the motion passes. That's pretty.
And since it's only one item, we probably won't live stream it. So we won't ask our staff to come in extra early. We'll just do that internally with us and record it in agenda only.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, business services. 7.1 is to presentations and discussion on demographic study. Mr. Venetian?
Thank you. We have today Scott Torducci. He is with Davis Demographics. He is a senior project manager. We just recently did complete a demographic study with Davis Demographics to get more insight in our community, where our students live, where they go to school. Scott will walk through the presentation and let us know what their findings were, how does a demographic study get compiled, what does the data tell us, and what does the future hold. So Scott, your presentation's on the desktop, and it's the first one.
I see it. Okay, well, thank you for having me. As I said, I am Scott Torducci with Davis Demographics and Planning. Just a little bit about us and what we do. We've been a demographics firm working exclusively for K-12 public school districts for 30 years. Craig Davis, his father started, it was part of the architecture firm, and so he's been around forever. I've been with the company for 26 years. As I mentioned, we have K-12 school districts throughout the country, and we have a proprietary software and planning models that we use. So a little bit about our philosophy and when we're doing this. One thing I want to make sure we know is, as I'm presenting a lot of numbers to you, I'm going to be presenting them based on residents. Because when we're looking at short to long-term facilities planning, we want to know where the students live rather than where they go to school. They go to school based on other things than demographics and the neighborhoods and things of that sort. They go to school based on principals and teachers and programs. All of those things can switch from school to school, year to year. So we're not trying to forecast choice. We're trying to forecast what the neighborhoods are doing in the actual kids living. So that's one of the things you'll hear from us. So we've done our resident forecast, and I'm sure you've read from cover to cover the thrilling report I gave you of where those students are. So we collect a lot of data. We have a wealth of data. It's called GIS, Geographic Information Systems. It's a living, breathing map that has data behind the scenes. We get all the street and address information of your area, all the parcels. So we have all that information. Of course, we've mapped your schools, we've mapped your attendance areas, and we've broken those attendance areas into these small planning areas that we call study areas. This allows us now to do analysis down to that small study area level. And if we need to, we can then move those around or look at them and decide, moving schools, stuff like that. But it gives us this analysis down to that level. It's not just district-wide. In those study areas, we've also collected your student data. We have a download of your student file for the last 4 years, and we geocoded them by their given address to where they live. So now we know in each of those study areas the number of students that live in that study area, their grade makeup, their ethnic makeup, their programs, everything we want. We could do analysis now. We have all that information, and you can see we have the density too of where those pockets of students live. So as we're doing this, we have all this information. We've also tracked the residential development that's going on in the district, as in the number of housing units that are going to be built. We're talking projects over 10 units. Infill projects, we don't really track. The type of units they are, where they are, when they plan on having students come out of them. So that's all that information that we have in there. So we do our forecast calculation. It's really just a modified cohort. What we do is we calculate it for each of those 74 district study areas. So each one of those has its own separate calculation. It's based on that 2021 student file from October. We base on the residents, and the 6th graders graduate, we move up everything else. And then from there, it's modified by 3 main factors. Families moving in and out of the district, which we call mobility. I'll explain and go through each of these a little bit more. New housing, that with a student yield factor would give us students from that area. And then future kindergarten enrollment. That's how we get and estimate the future kindergarten classes. So I'm going to start with mobility. Mobility is the retention, is the students moving in and out of the district. So when we talk about mobility, we talk about that if you have 100 first graders one year, you would expect 100 second graders the next year. That would be your normal one-to-one mobility, or it would be show up here as a 1. Areas that are growing, you might see a little bit more students the next year or a little bit less. So what we've done is looked at 4 years of data, 3 years of change, comparing K to 1, 1 to 2 for those 3 or 4 years. And we've averaged that out to get what we see mobility here. And now we've broken it down to get the nuances in different areas of the district. So because again, the whole district's not homogeneous. We know there's different areas and personalities to all the schools. So we've given a factor for each grade at the elementary school level. So those are not necessarily those kids going to those schools. That's the students living in those schools. So we're seeing that. So what this is saying that on average, that's in the students living in Central Elementary School attendance area, you're seeing a 13% increase between kindergarten and first grade over the last 4 years. What we're seeing here is about 50%. 50 are in that small negative in those red, 50 are in the green. It's a very stable looking actually mobility factor. We don't see a lot of growth. We see our normal K to 1, and we see some negatives, but we don't see huge negatives. We see a 99% and 98%. So that's just a few moving out. So for every 100 kids, that's only 1 or 2 kids. So that's normal turnover. We're not seeing anything that is not standing out to me as a demographer. The next factor is new housing. There's not much going on in new housing. You don't have a lot of open land to have big developments. You don't have a lot of open land to have a lot of new single family housing. You're fairly built out. You have just a few multifamily attached condos types and apartments that are being built. I think it's just a little bit over 200. So you're not going to get a lot of students out of those. They just don't produce a lot of students. But what we've tracked them. They're going to come in a few 50 to 90 a year. Over the next 3 or 4 years, you'll get some students from that, but it's not a huge factor. Now, future kindergarten enrollment. We forecast future kindergarten enrollment based on the current kindergarten class and future births. So what we're assuming is that 5 years after birth, you'll see a student come in to kindergarten on average. Not necessarily the same exact student, but we're just giving it an estimate here. And what I've done is looked at from 2006 to 2020. and broken up into 5-year increments here. And you can see in 2006, there was over 1,000 births in the area. This is based on California Department of Health zip code area, so it's roughly correlated to your school district. And by 2020, there's in the 700s. You can see each year, each of the 5-year increments has gone down from over 1,000 to averaging less than 800. So those are what we're basing that. In this chart here that I have, the yellow is the 2021 K class. So it was born in 2016. Every year after that, we're seeing a decline in the number of births. In our forecast, that translates to a decline in the number of kindergarten classes, students you're going to see in the future. Furthermore, we see the capture rates. Again, not necessarily a one-to-one. The ones that are birthed or born in the area are the ones showing up. But on average, you've seen about 50 to 60% of births in the area you'll see as a kindergarten student at one of your schools living in one of your districts. Last year or this year, it was at 54%. So we're seeing less kids. Just overall, there's less students there. And unfortunately, a little bit less are coming to your district. Excuse me. So with all those factors, the stableness, the births going down, and unfortunately, not a lot of residential development, we're seeing your district-wide forecasts continue to decline at a little bit, maybe a little bit less rate, but about a similar rate of what it's declined in the past. So we're seeing that for, oh, wait, before I go to that one, I'll mention this. Now, you're seeing a lot of this decline, not just from students leaving the district or anything of that sort. A lot of it is just natural attrition. As you graduate out, larger 6th grade classes, they're being replaced the next year with smaller kindergarten classes. So you can see I see water coming to me, excuse me. Thank you very much. Excuse me, thank you. So you can see in 2018, you had, and this is residents. These are the number of resident students. So any out-of-district students aren't included in these numbers. 676 6th graders lived in your district that are going to one of your schools. The next year, your kindergarten class was 534. 142 student decline, just natural decline as they graduate out. They're not being replaced the following year. Same thing happened between 2019 and 2020. 625 graduated, 494 started kindergarten, so it's 131 student decline. Again, in 2021. So it was happening pre-pandemic and also the pandemic. So 635 graduating, 471 came in for this year. So if we look at that and we base all of our kindergarten classes on that births and with the current kindergarten, so our base is 471, and then we're seeing declining birth, you can see that kindergarten class is continuing to decline, but with your stable growth, stable mobility, that 471 as it moves through the system up and down, fairly stable though, will eventually be down to 482 in 2027 compared to the 676 in 2018. So again, a lot of your decline is based on just natural attrition of there's less students in the area. The decline is by the entire school, almost all district, with the exception of Central. So you're seeing it in almost all the elementary schools. Again, this is resident numbers. And the other thing we've done is looked at the school of choice analysis. This shows you where the students live versus where they're going to school. This is always a kind of an interesting analysis because it shows that choice, and you can see where your programs are and the effects and where they're pulling from. So if we look at Central, I'll keep picking on Central. If we look at that first top row, there's 475 or 25, don't have my glasses on, 425 students living in that area. With that, 324 are actually going to Central. 10 are going to El Tanyan. Thank you. 11 are going to Ira Harbison, and so on. So you can see where they're going. They're choosing other schools. And then if you look down, you see that Central Elementary School has a total at the very bottom of an enrollment of 491, but again, only 324 make up that 491 that are living there, but you're getting 11 from another school, that's 6 from Ira, and John Otis is from 29. So you can see where they're coming in. You've also got 35 out of district students coming into there. So this is just let you see where your students are moving around and deciding where to go to school. So finally, so some of the things that stood out to me is the district mobility trend is relatively flat, relatively stable. Nothing really stood out there. You only have about a little over 200 new city-approved units planned for the next 5 years. All of them are multifamily or apartments. They don't really get a lot of kids out of them. The 5-year births have went from over 1,000 to less than 800 in the last 15 years. And we can see an increase. We anticipate an increase in TK students from AB 130, but we don't know how many that's going to relate into and actually continue on. So that's one thing. Decline in each of the 4 years of historic data. And then as these larger graduating sixth grade classes move out of the system, they're being replaced by smaller K classes. And so it's just that natural attrition that is actually causing a decline. So with that, I'm going to open up to all the questions and have a drink of water again.
Yeah, I'm curious as to how, if any way possible, could that be changed? How do we grow our enrollment, in other words? Do we have to go out and stand on the street corners or place ads in the paper?
That's a little bit beyond my purview, but that would be possible. People have done it through programs and such. But the program is not in decline because there's not choosing, it's because they're not kids. There's not students are just there. I mean, that's just happening throughout the United States. We're the smallest birth rates we've had. California is the smallest growth it's ever been for years. So we're not seeing that. In areas like yours that are built out without the new development, we're not seeing that turnover of housing where you would see a normal house, new house would get built, kids grow up, family grows up, they move away, a new family moves in. We're not seeing that anymore. That's something of the past. Now we're seeing people staying in their mother and father or man and wife or one person in a 2 or 3 bedroom house with no kids. It's something completely different than we've seen before.
And is that because the people that are buying now can't afford to have kids yet because they both need to be working? We don't have those single working parent families.
Yes, it's a combination of that. It's a combination of a cultural change where people don't want to have kids as early as they did. It's a combination of housing costs. I'm not going to move from my 2,400 square square foot house to a 1,200 square foot house and paid twice as much.
Right.
Yeah, my paid off house. So there's a combination of factors that are affecting this and affecting our kindergartens and our births.
Thank you.
Just my understanding of Kimball, Kimball's flat, pretty much.
Yes,
Is that, because you had talked about birth rates and all of that up till now, is Kimball flat more because of the anticipated, because of it has a specific focus?
No.
As a school, then why would they be so noticeably different?
well, let me look in the report and I can see if I can answer that for you. Because again, the report and the flatness that we're showing is the students living there. So it's not necessarily the ones going there. So the main thing I see with Kimball, if I'm looking for it in the report, it's page 25, is they're not seeing the phenomenon that we're seeing in the rest of the district. So they have their kindergarten is at 42 for the last 4 years, has been 42, 35, 32, 41 of students living there. Very similar to their 6th grade class. So they're not having less kids. They seem to be producing more kindergartners. If you look at on page 26, Lincoln Acres, they're graduating out 82, 86, 84, 89, and bringing in 75 or 62, 67, 52. So you can see there's that difference. So it's really a matter of the makeup of the resident area and not necessarily anything that's happening at the school.
So Kimball just truly is its own place, is what you're telling me?
It's got a different trend than some of the other areas.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Pizarro?
Thank you. In regards to mobility, I would like to get, question about how we can determine factors about migration of the kids, even though they live in the area. Do you have some data on that, or maybe a potential forecast influence on what is the biggest one?
The overall mobility factor doesn't look in depth into any of that. It really is just a count of students
Okay.
From year to year. There might be ways to look at those kind of influences. It would probably be something that we'd have to work out with the district of looking at student file, getting some information from them, and discussing it. But yeah, at this point, no, we don't have that information built into that.
Okay, that would be something that we can tackle and to see factors about what they're migrating, even though they live in the area, they go to another district or another city to be educated.
So a few years ago, we did an analysis to see how many students were leaving our district to go to other districts. And what we found was almost the exact same amount of students that left to go to Chula Vista, South Bay, San Ysidro, other area schools. We were receiving almost the exact same amount of students. And I think that's also reflected in this report for how many are leaving or also coming in, and it's pretty much flat. And then we also looked at charter school to see how many of our students might be going to charter schools, wondering if it might be programmatic. So we did not find that our students were leaving us to go to a charter school either, which was, during the charter movement, that was an assumption that a lot of people had. And one of the things that we learned from Scott when he did a draft presentation to us is that the students, when they do come to national, tend to stay. So once we get them, they pretty much stay with us the whole time. But they do leave for a variety of factors, and we just try to look like, is it bullying? They have to mark some, a chart. And they're not leaving for any other reasons other than childcare of a grandparent maybe lives in Chula Vista.
Maybe, factor like
Parent
work.
Parent work, yeah, things like that. So, and we're getting just as many students for the exact same reasons. So, yeah.
Ms. Gibbs, did you have a question?
No, my question was regarding what data mining we've done.
Yes, Dr. Brady, so the information from this report, the district is going to be using it to let us know how we're going to proceed with student population in our schools, or can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so we engaged Davis as when the board approved the contract to work with Davis Demographics. It was around the time we were doing the budget reduction discussions, because we want to really prepare for a multi-year to have the staff that's appropriate due to what enrollment we anticipate. And so we'll be looking over this data in terms of making decisions for long-term budgeting procedures. And I don't know if Mr. Evanescence wants to add to that at all, but we really wanted to see, like, is there something we're not doing that we could be doing differently? Like Mr. Amir just said, could we be marketing better? Could we be trying to draw people more to National City? And what we learned preliminary, and of course we're going to look deeper at this full report, is that this is really a decline in birth rates. This is a low turnover of housing. This is unavailability of housing because people are living in their houses and not moving away, making room. And anybody trying to buy a house in National City right now sees that there's very low inventory. So, unless they're going to live in a surrounding neighborhood, it would be difficult for us to get the students. And if you go to any of our neighboring districts, they're all also experiencing the same decline in the birth rate. So we're not going to get as many from them. So yes, we're going to use these for budgeting purposes, for staffing purposes. And one thing that we would like to know from the board is, would we like a follow-up? We had a follow-up question. If we were going to use this and needed to close a school, because some of our enrollments in our schools have gotten really low, it was a suggestion made by the Budget Reduction Task Force. Do we want to get an analysis of which school would be a recommended school to close and why, and where those students might go if that school were closed, so that we could make those future preparations? And that's something that we would like to do and would like some feedback from the board on.
Well, I believe that we have to have our options, and so that would be one thing to study and consider. And regardless of what it is, what action we'll be taking later on. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know what type of collaboration can we have in regards to information about housing and the prices that we have for inflation and house pricing, and also in regards to leasing apartments and house sweepers here in the area. So it would be something that we need to consider to collaborate with the city. And that's why what is the forecast on that about housing acquisition by families to have ownership instead of leasing an apartment that is new development coming up?
I believe Mr. Evanescence is writing that down to look into.
Please, thank you.
I know the city has offered options to our residents, offering them low interest loans in order for them to be able to afford to buy their own house, and it was the first time home buyers program, and they've done that at least twice, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm in contact with the housing committee. They have a housing committee in place, so I would like to see what the results are from that city and how we can oversee that and to see forecasting on this for this purpose. So.
In your district, you are absolutely unique and wonderful, but you're not unique in this situation. This is happening for most of the districts I'm working with. It's just, there's, the students.
So there's really not much we can do.
Right.
Yeah, it's the only areas I'm seeing where there's growth is where there's a lot of residential development happening. And so unfortunately, you don't have the land. There's not the area for that, yeah.
So even if we had all these programs and advertising, our families are just not
Yes.
purchasing,
It's an aging population.
Yeah.
Without young kids. It's a completely different demographic change that we're seeing. It started 10 years ago, and we're really seeing it hit pretty hard now.
Yeah.
Because that's when the kids would have started coming into schools.
Can we deny requests for transfers, those who want to go out? No, they have to say, we'll gain, 5 kids?
We can do that, but then it goes both ways. So we would get none in.
it's pretty much.
Well, we don't have to tell everybody, right?
The other place that this begins, again, that we have to pay attention is that, the number of children we have, of course, dictates the number of employees we have. So that's the other piece that we will have to be looking into so that we handle our attrition with care and respect to all of our certificated and classified and otherwise staff members. Because it means, of course, that we're losing, we will be continuing to lose money as we go, as far as income goes. I know people, the moment that you say that we could close a school, everybody's shoulders go up. But it's not just a site that we're talking about, we are talking about our employee and staff ratios as well.
Just looking at the chart on page 10 of the presentation, in 2018, it shows 4,503 students, projected out to 2028 at 3,366. That's over 1,000 students, 1,100 students. When you multiply that by an average of about 11,500 per student, and that's not including any supplemental concentration grant money that we get above and beyond on top of that base funding, that's $13 million less revenue. And 90% of our revenue is going to staff salaries. So again, that is, like you said, that is very, very important when we're looking at staffing, when we are looking at attrition, when we're looking at filling those additional positions. If we don't lose positions or reduce positions by attrition, then they become future layoffs when the revenue stops coming in.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your time here tonight and all the hard work that was put into this very detailed report, and it's very helpful for at least myself to understand everything that we are going to have to be up. So thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. And thank you very much for the water.
Moving on to item 7.2, presentation and discussion on measure N and HH. Mr. Menezes.
Please bear with me, I am not familiar with maps. Well, thank you. So tonight I'll be presenting on our general obligation bond projects, ones that have been completed in the past, currently being worked on, and proposed projects for the future. I have with me David Castillo, our Director of Facilities and Maintenance, and he could answer any questions that come up during the presentation. So the school district has had 2 bond proposals approved. Just the top line kind of explains what the general obligation bond is meant for, what it's allowed to do in the state of California. The school district passed 2 bonds, one Measure N in 2014 with $26 million authorization. It passed with 78.6% authorization. So 78.6% of voters said yes, you're able to go and get these bonds and use them for your facilities. The following year, or 2016, Measure HH, again, the voters approved with an even higher approval rating of 83.2% to go out and have $30 million to spend on our facilities. And the purpose for these bond programs are at the bottom. They're almost verbatim the same. except for a slight change for Measure HH. So Measure N, this was the first bond that was approved. Measure N has been spent completely, so there are no more funds in Measure N. That was the 26.1 million. It's a little higher due to the interest that was earned on that. So 26,198,000 was spent on these projects. Many of the projects that were done with Measure N were included in the facilities master plan, which was adopted by the board in 2014. The facilities master plan kind of outlined in different phases projects that were a priority for the district. So based on the projects that were in the facilities master plan and the projected costs, 17,580,000 was the projected cost in the facilities master plan for these projects. We actually ended up spending 26.98 million on these projects. And this was HVAC projects, so heating, ventilation, air conditioners throughout the district, upgrading the electrical systems throughout the district, developing the network backbone throughout the district, the Olivewood parking lot, the Palmer Way parking lot, and a walkway at the preschool center. So for $26 million, this is what Measure N paid for. Measure HH is the second bond that was approved. Only 3 million of the 30 million has been issued. Currently, we have expensed or budgeted for $1.9 million in spending. There's still a little over $1 million left from that original 3 million that we had issued in bonds. So there's $27 million remaining in bond authorization, meaning we can still access $27 million for facilities needs in the future. Phase one, again, from the facilities master plan was not completed with the original Measure N bond money. So Measure HH did have to go towards paying for completing those phase one projects. So it was $895,000 for some HVAC projects. What was not included in the facilities master plan, but was a need and an allowable expense for the general obligation bond, was roof repairs for modular buildings throughout the district. Also, with what was not included in the facilities master plan, but what we are purchasing through the bond program is blinds throughout the district, which meets the safety guideline that's allowed in the bond project. So we are proposing the following for the remaining amount of $27 million in Measure HH. So we're proposing to do these projects in phases. Phase two would be accessibility projects. So accessibility is accessibility for students or adults to any kind of facility that they have physical inability to access. We want to make them accessible to for those people to access, including ramps, bathrooms, gates, sinks, stages, and playgrounds. And these would be district-wide. Our estimated budget for this is $9 million. And again, it's an estimate until we actually have an architect and we have actual engineers look at it. That number will change, I guarantee it. That's our phase one priority for Measure HH. Phase two, sorry. Phase one was completed through Measure N. Phase two is accessibility. Phase three is safety and security. These will be projects throughout the district, and this would be access control systems. So replacing locks that we use keys for with access cards, having more integrated system with knowing who's on campus, being able to control locks and doors and whatnot. That would be district-wide. Shade, so shade for students outside, sunshade, actually. This probably was not a need 10, 20 years ago, but the climate is changing and shade is definitely a priority for the district. Furniture throughout the district. Currently, we do have furniture in the district that is 20 to 30 years old throughout our campuses, and they're definitely a safety hazard. We try to replace what we can when we can, but to replace it on a scale district-wide, we would have to use bond funds for that. And also, we want to replace our marquees, kind of standardize all of our marquees throughout the district to allow for remote access to the marquees, to put messages on the marquees through an app or a computer program. Many of our marquees are outdated or no longer supported through the original manufacturer that installed them. So we are looking to replace all of the marquees throughout the district with more contemporary marquees. And phase 4 of our Measure HH proposed projects would be conservation projects. That would be installing walking tracks, replacing some asphalt with walking tracks throughout the district, doing artificial turf rather than the current landscaping that we have, which is water intensive. Looking into solar for our schools, as well as possibly solar battery combination for charging our buses if we eventually purchase electric buses, which may or may not be forced upon us by the state in the future. And also irrigation, looking at where we could cut back on the need for irrigation or improve our irrigation where we have them to be more water wise. And again, that's an estimated budget of $9 million for this project. So our next steps would be, we do have an RFQ out, request for qualifications for an architectural firm. We have to grade those submissions, and we will bring a contract to the board for approval for an architect to serve the district. Projects that do not meet architectural services will be proposed for board action. So there are some projects, very limited few, that architects do not need to be involved. And if those are things that we can do without having to go to an architect to use the bond funds for, we will bring it to the board for consideration. And finally, we will send out a mailer to the community, just kind of highlighting the bonds that we have and also the programs that we have in National City and the ability for the community to enroll their students in our school district. And I could answer any questions or any comments.
Thank you. Ms. Lizarraga?
Yes, I just a question, thank you for Mr. Albanese for this report, I'm really very enthusiastic about this. But my question is that is up to this bonding remaining money that you consider the 9 million is it's nice to have more accessibility items to buy, but the maintenance is also considered in this bonding? Because, I don't know, maybe situation of vandalism or fee removal or something. Because I might be out of the other set of money to maintain the marquee, for example, or another subcontractor to do that.
Correct. So generally maintenance is paid out of general fund. There's a restricted resource 8150 that should cover the general maintenance costs throughout the year. There are sometimes an item in the LCAP as well that kind of covers facilities needs. But generally, day-to-day maintenance wouldn't be a qualifying expense for our bond program. So we go and install marquees, but we have vandalized, the marquees get vandalized. We wouldn't be able to go back to the bond program to pay for the repair of those. That would only be something that, the 8150 would pay for, or a different facilities account can pay for.
All right, thank you.
No.
Okay.
I have a couple for you, Mr. Evanessi. Starting with measure and expenditures. According to 6th grade math, we spent about 48% more than we projected. That's a lot. And so I'm wondering what happened, because 48% more is, if we extrapolate to that 27,000, that would, or 27 million, would be we were paying 40 million for the things we have listed, and we can't do that. So I know that I wasn't here for all of this, but could you give me a clue why it was that much more? in cost?
I agree with you. I don't have an exact answer. It's not something David and I have discussed in the recent past, but generally speaking, when you start opening up walls, you start running into problems that you didn't expect. David, do you want to elaborate more?
I actually wasn't here. I was here to complete the final two projects about that part of that measure. But for the previous projects, from what I understood, that were completed back in 2015-16, there is a lot of abatement that needs to be completed in our sites. So there's unforeseen items that come up. So once they start running ductwork and reopening up ceilings for our school sites that are pretty much, yeah. So then and there's a lot of unforeseen items that come up, and those were like in change orders and things like that, or had to go back to DSA because it's like, oh, this is here, so we're changing the structure of a building, whether it was running air ducts or something. So, or in certain cases, they had to recalculate the roof loads for all the new units that were being put in. So it was something that wasn't really accounted for at the time when they were going for the bond. And then of course, escalation. So over a period of time, the longer it takes to complete a project, the longer we wait to do the project, the cost of construction continues to rise, and everything from product to labor.
So my question then is, how do we plan for that to the best of our ability and avoid it if we know, I mean, our buildings haven't gotten younger, and so we are still going to run into some of those issues. Like, we need to best be prepared. I don't want to turn around and have the board vote for something that we promise and then turn around and, like, frankly, I don't want to look children in the face and say, I'm sorry, you don't get the playgrounds that you've been promised, because we can't pull them off. Or we can't actually make the buildings safer for you because we ran out and we didn't plan. So what do we do better? And you don't necessarily have to give me that answer right now, but what do we do better so that we are more accountable? This is a substantial amount of money. And like I said, that it would be at $27 million turns into a $40 million if we followed these numbers. We can't. So how do we do a better job?
So the best way to do it is when you have architectural drawings, you have a certain degree of approval with them in terms of how accurate are those drawings. Because many of the changes that occur are because the drawings were not accurate and change orders come about. But if it's an architectural error, the district is liable. So you award a contract based on those drawings. And if those drawings are incorrect, you will pay more. So making sure those drawings are correct, picking an architect that does good work, that has good drawings, and you hold the contractor accountable in terms of the contract you award them, making sure the contract is accurate, making sure legal has done their work. That is really the only way, as long as the error is not because of the district, it's because of the contractor, then we are not liable for those cost increases. But if it is our fault, then the district pays for those cost increases. So something as simple as abatement, where whoever was responsible wasn't aware of the level of abatement that was needed. You have to pay for it. Once you enter a contract, the job has to get done, and if the cost increases because of abatement, you have to do it. So making sure you do it right the first time in terms of your drawings, your contract, that really goes a long way in saving money down the line.
Dr. Brady, why don't you respond? Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to add that the longer we wait to do construction, the more those costs rise. So if you go to the long-range facility master plan, you'll see projected costs for the things that we're talking about continuing on. And we sat and looked at those and agree that those quotes aren't even accurate in comparison to what we would pay today for those same projects. So what we tried to do is estimate based on what we thought some of the current costs would be to kind of get a ballpark to start our discussion with the board. And then we tried in phase 2 and phase 3 to prioritize what we thought would be most needed so that if the money does run out, these projects would be presented to the board in priority order, just as they are in the long-range facility master plan. So we started with phase 1, phase 2 is accessibility. We're gonna try to get as many of those projects done. Then phase 3 and phase 4, we kind of agree we probably won't get to phase 4. And then when you sell bonds, you have to do the projects within 3 years. But we know we have labor shortages, we know we have supply shortages, we know we have increased costs. So we're trying to figure out, we have our bond advisor here today, and that's gonna be the next item, to kind of talk to the board about what is really feasible, what should we be looking at. We wanted to get ahead of the architect coming on so that we knew where we were going, we could hit the ground running and start getting some of those projects in front of the board. But again, they are prioritized in order of need, in priority order. And then we're gonna go by phase so that we don't overpromise and then not be able to complete everything.
Thank you. My other piece, I am thankful that the first next thing we're looking at is the accessibility projects. Because frankly, I've watched teachers try to carry a child who has wheelchair only access to the top of a slide so that they can let him slide. And that shouldn't be. And so I've also watched parents not be able to get, and grandparents not be able to get into buildings. Not necessarily here, but I'm assuming also here that has happened. Because, frankly, our playgrounds are not accessible. And knowing those things, the fact that this is one of our next priorities, that all our children would be able to actually be on stage in order to do presentations, to be seen by their parents, because when they sit in the auditoriums at the schools, whoever's on the ground doesn't get seen over all the parents doing this, trying to take pictures. So they need to be able to be up where they can be seen well and honored. I have mentioned to you before, and I'll throw it out there. As we look at bathrooms, one of the things I hope that we include is the equity of privacy for everyone who goes to the bathroom. Having the girls have private stalls and the boys have multi-urinals where they can all watch each other, that's Victorian era privacy. That's some assumption that the girls have earned some right to be protected in ways that the boys have not. And so if you want to throw something on your list that I'm very concerned about, truth of the matter is, all our schools, we only have so many bathrooms. So you will have a kindergartner in a bathroom with a 6th grader, and they should not be at the same urinal seeing everything they see. It should be that they have the right to the privacy and protection that a stall has. I know that makes a complete difference in structure, but as we are talking about equity and accessibility, I'm throwing that thing in the bucket because our boys deserve that as well. No, our children, whether they are identify male, female, non-binary, anything along that line, deserve that respect. So I'm going to add that one to your list of things to look at.
Mr. Garcia, I saw that you were trying to respond. Did you want to?
Because, yes, thank you. And actually, this will kind of help answer that question that you asked earlier. It would be that when we look at accessibility, we look at it as a whole, so that would kind of reduce the cost as well up front, because we're not just going to do an accessibility project and then say later on, oh, we're going to get to the playground, because I've been in contact with DSA, and what that does is, like, when you open up to accessibility, it's like, what other items are we going to touch on? So then if we're going to touch on like a restroom or something, or ramps or a playground, which would change path of travel, then at that same time, we would want to do that other work at that same time, so we wouldn't have to revisit it a second time. And the same was, we allocated some funds in there as well to do any of the plumbing structures and stuff that we need to do pre-hand maybe, or any work legwork that we have to do pre-hand with DSA is what we're working on right now, in contact to say, okay, if we wanted to do this, does this require DSA's approval first? What would this require, so that we can avoid those additional costs at a later date?
Well, because the truth is, when our structures keep someone out, it says something. And that's the last message that any of us want to be sending to any of our families, any individual, is that you are not necessary nor wanted here. We didn't think about you. And so like I said, I'm thankful that this is our first start, and that's our next phase.
Ms. Donna?
My comment is regarding, I heard you say that you were sending out a mailer to all the residents, explaining what it is that we're doing, and I want to thank you for that, because I believe that every resident deserves to be apprised of what their tax dollars are doing for our children. And so I believe that's a very important step for us to take.
Thank you, Ms. Dalla. And we did share the postcard that we will mail with the Citizen Bond Oversight Committee. And they were in agreement with the design and mailing it out. And we'll send it to every resident within the 91950.
I do hope that it's not postcard size. I hope it's a little bit bigger so it doesn't get lost in the
It's a
junk
little,
mail.
yeah, it is a little bigger. It's what the mass mailing for USPS allows. So we're in the process of that at the moment. So check your mail soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Gates, for stole my words. But I would like to see if we can see the list of priorities that you're going to prioritize, of course, but prior to just go ahead. I don't know what is going to be the next step for us to see in regards to proceeding with implementation.
Definitely. So next steps would be when we get an architect on board, we'll bring a contract to the board for approval for an architect. Also, we'll work with them to put a realistic list together on what projects we could work on. And before anything ever happens, we will come to the board for approval on our projects. Because every project starts with a design. So that design will be presented to the board for approval. And you'll be well aware of anything that we do before it's ever done.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest, I don't know if it's happened in the past, but when the architect draws whatever plans for whichever school, I would like for someone at each school to go over those plans, because I remember in the past when we were talking about Olivewood and Palmer Way, there was an item on the playground where they said, well, we need to take this out, it's gonna cost money to remove this and replace it over here. It wasn't even there in the first place. I don't know where the architect got this information from, but their drawings were inaccurate. So I would like for each principal to go over those with a fine tooth comb and make sure, like you say, with the money that's being spent properly, and we're not having to spend additional monies. And I remember too, during the pandemic, the cost of lumber skyrocketing. That's not something that we could have predicted, but we know that it happens. I've never seen a project go up in price that much as what it happened recently. So, just a suggestion. Thank you.
I'll take note of that. Thank you.
The problem is we keep talking, I keep thinking. So it hasn't hit 6:30, I'm not asleep yet. So, I would also, I know that, for instance, Dr. Brady, you've mentioned Ms. Yagan's class has worked and presented and come up with some very creative ideas and possibilities and solutions. I'm wondering just how much, and with your roundtable, how much we can have student input into these processes, and also that family input. It doesn't make sense that we do some things that we do things that directly impact them, but never ask them if it meets the needs, which kind of flows into my second piece and kind of fits here. It's not just whether or not there's actually this thing that the architect draws. There are districts out there that, of course, are not ours, that are notorious for not talking to the people who are going to use the things and placing them places that are not helpful. Or, for instance, I know places that received their Promethean boards back in the day, and they were placed in the middle of whiteboards and cupboards that nobody now can access. There are like things like that that are not helpful. And actually eliminate some of the resources that we already had in place that are helpful. So, if we can we have an end user in mind. Whether it's our teachers, whether it's our staff, whether it's, we need to keep all of those in mind. So the input is vital. So we don't have air filters in the middle of whiteboards, and I know that we don't have air filters in the middle of whiteboards, but I know places where air filters have eliminated whiteboards for classrooms. Other districts, not this one. And that's hard. It makes it hard for teachers, and it makes it hard when those adjustments are made and people are not heard. So,
And as a result, it's difficult for us.
it is difficult for the students. And in some ways, it's wasted money because we've eliminated something that is a tool or blocked or whatever. And that's just, it's not best wisdom and it's not best use of what we have. So all those things, I'm done now.
Did you? Well, I just wanted to first thank you both for being here and presenting here. I did have some something to add in regards to the boys' bathroom. I know that privacy has been of concern, but also if we're unable to provide private stalls, if we can at least configure it where if you pass by, you don't see right in. Because oftentimes you can just see right into the bathrooms, and that's even less of privacy for our students in terms of the urinals for our students. But the doors are privacy, I think makes more sense for our students. And the other thing is, just to add, is the furniture. I'm excited to see that on there at least it's phase 3, because our furniture, our kids deserve to have better furniture. It's kind of upsetting when we have things kind of pieced together, just to be able to provide seating arrangements for our students. However, is this going to be something that is going to be more ergonomic for our students? Is it going to be something that we have flexible seating? Is it something that will be presented to us prior to purchases? Because I know that we have had, Dr. Brady had a pilot program in regards to our seating arrangements, and not everything was well received. Some things were, some things were not. But is this something that we can look into instead of having a standard, because we're not really teaching the standard ways anymore? If that's something that we can for sure be brought, because we need to ask our students, our staff, what is going to be useful in our classrooms, and how can we make accommodations?
So I believe Dr. Brady did do an extensive research and pilots of furniture in schools, and that's kind of our basis for purchasing furniture in the future. That a lot of that work has already been done.
Right.
It's just going back and looking at it with some furniture that may have been piloted 5 years ago or 4 years ago probably isn't still being built today. So, but that will be our basis for future purchases of furniture. And yeah, every child has a different mode of learning. Every child has a different need. So those are things we do keep in mind. But as far as what we will buy in the future, that again, it will be very transparent in terms of what we plan on doing, going to the students, taking a look at what do we need. It won't be just we're going to buy 1,000 of these desks, and that's that. A lot of the work has been done, so I don't intend to reinvent that. But it'll be working with Dr. Brady on that work that had been done and moving forward with that.
Right, because every school site had a either classroom, a library, or some sort of space that was was offered and definitely a lot of work was put into it and it would make any sense to start over. But I'm excited that we're actually gonna put that to good use because it was actually, I enjoyed all the different pitches that we received, but also the ability for our students to have, different accessibilities to seating arrangements and so on.
And we are working at trying to get pricing for some of that furniture that was chosen in the in those pilots. So that is something we may be able to bring sooner than later. But again, because of inflation, supply chain issues, we're looking at higher costs and longer delivery times as well. So it will be a long project, but definitely one that's worth doing.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, I just like to add one last thing. Let's be mindful that we're not purchasing furniture for schools that will be closed. So make sure we do things in order, so we're not buying all this new furniture, close the school, and then it goes into storage.
I'll make note of that.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7.3, presentation and discussion on issuance of Measure H bonds. Mr. Evanescence?
Do you have hard copies? I have hard copies.
So we just had a pretty thorough discussion about what we want to do with our facilities in the future. We have Jason List here. He's a principal with ISOM Advisors. He is our financial advisor for the school district, and he will discuss our GO projects, our general obligation projects, kind of a fiscal analysis, where the market is at, and what we're able to do in terms of accessing the $27 million that's left. So, Jason, it's all yours.
Well, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jason Litz with Eisman Advisors, and I know everybody's favorite topics is bonds. So if along the way, if you have any questions, I like to keep these meetings conversational. So don't feel like you need to wait till the end to ask a question, because I know this is not something you hear every day. I might use some acronyms that I'm not aware of, that you're not aware of. So please feel free to stop me as you see fit. So just very briefly, introduction about our firm, Eisman Advisors. We've been in California since 2011. A bunch of us came from various different firms. This is my 21st year in this industry, and I've seen a lot of different interest rate cycles, which I'll talk about here a little bit later in the presentation. We have offices throughout the state of California. I'm in the Orange County office, which really means working on my home. Mostly. At the very bottom of the page, and I apologize for the formatting, it's a little out of source, but in the book it should be okay. These are the districts in the county that we work with. And the only reason I include this in here is the breadth of districts we work with is that we're very familiar with our county, the county auditor's office, the assessor's office, taxpayers association. Your county in particular is very involved in bond financings, and we are very familiar with what the requirements that they seek in terms of tax collections, in terms of delinquencies that they consider, in terms of tax rate growth rates that they assume. And with bond programs, when you're dealing with public money, I always have to say you should be more conservative than not, because you're dealing with taxpayer money. And the way I've set up your bond program to finish out the rest of the 27 million of the Measure HH is definitely more conservative than not in nature. But we'll get into some of the weeds as we go through this. So on this slide, this is your district's assessed valuation. And all assessed valuation means is taxable property within the district's borders. And this is a 16-year, I think 16 years in your book perhaps, the 16-year payback of assessed values. And over that 16-year period, I believe the total now is 4.6% growth on average. And you can see leading up to the Great Recession, your tax base grew by a lot. The Great Recession came, and you're not alone in this. Throughout the state, we saw tax base declines, 2011, 2010, 11, 12. But since then, you've come out of the recession at a pretty good clip. And I think from fiscal 21 to 22, you grew by 3.52%. And the only reason this page is germane for you tonight is anytime you're thinking about a bond program, thinking about selling bonds, we have to project out how your tax base may grow in the future because we sell bonds against that future tax base growth. And again, I like to be more conservative with taxpayer dollars than history suggests. So your history here is just 4.7 or 4.62 in the book. My growth assumptions going forward on average is 3.5% on average. To be even more conservative than that, over the next 2 fiscal years, I assumed 2.5% growth. 2.5% growth the following year, and then 3.5% as an average. And the reason I'm so conservative with my numbers, I'll get to in just a couple slides here. But before we get back to Measure HH, just to give you a background, and some of this is redundant from your business officer presentation, is your prior election, 2014, that was 21.6 or 26.1 million. You sold 18 million of that in the first issuance, the Series A, and then you followed that with a Series B sale of 8.1 million. So you have no remaining authorization from 2014 election. The approval rate was very nice at 78.6%. Under what you sold was what's called a Prop 39 election, and what Prop 39 elections require is that those who vote, you need 55% to say yes. So you were 23.86% above the minimum requirement, which really just shows the great support you have in your community for the school, for facilities. Moving on to Measure HH that you passed in 2016 for $30 million. You sold 3 million, the Series A bonds, leaving 27 million left to be sold. To give the vote in favor on this at 83.2%, you're 23.2% above kind of what's the minimum required. So again, very, very good support throughout the district. The first bullet point and the subsequent verbiage below is just the 75 word ballot language that voters voted on. That just gives as much as you can in 75 words, gives you what the ballot and what the projects were all about for the measure. What I have on the second bullet point is an assumed bond issuance sale. It's roughly $9 million every 2 years. But this could be accelerated. It could be slowed down based on district need. You have your authorization, and for $30 million, 27 remaining. And let's assume in 2022, you want to sell $9 million, but we come to realize at the end, you only need $8 million for whatever reason. That additional $1 million goes back into the authorization bucket, and you can sell the $8 million. Taxpayers are only taxed at what and when you sell bonds and the amount that you sell them at. And I have a graph at the end that'll help kind of explain how that all works. So depending on need, depending on spend down capability, we're assuming approximately $9 million every 2 years to finish out the authorization. So again, assuming what I think is a more conservative than that growth rate of 3.5%, based on your history, based on relative real estate values in the community. The county assessor, what they'll do, they'll assess your growth rate at 2% year over year. So anything above 2% is considered real growth. And to only assume 1.5% real growth based on property values, anytime a home changes hands, the county assessor will reassess that property value, and that's how you get your total growth. So I do think 3.5% for this community is pretty conservative. The second bullet point here, I think this is, a pretty good takeaway, big takeaway, and something to think about as a group, is that once you sell bonds, you have 3 years to spend 85% or more of those proceeds. So the example is, we sell bonds for $10 million. We have to be reasonably certain that you can sell 8.5 million within the next 3 years. If you can show that reasonability, the IRS is okay with it, your bond attorney is okay with it. However, if we sell 10 million, we can only sell 6 million. There's something that's called IRS arbitrage rebate. It's essentially a penalty that you as a district would have to pay back to the IRS. So it's good to be careful with how you budget, how you estimate your spending, because we don't want to sell more bonds than you can spend within a given period of time. With that said, I think there's a lot of talk about construction cost escalation, making sure our money has the biggest bang for the buck. I don't see economic situations improving over the next few years. As a matter of fact, our Fed policy, the Fed board, they're suggesting that they'll do whatever they can to cap inflation, including increasing rates at their next 6 meetings, which likely means higher interest rates going forward, again, medium to long term, and a higher construction cost, medium to long term. So with that said, the more that you're certain you can spend over a 3-year period of time, it's better to get into the market sooner than later, because I do think costs are going to go up. With my clients I work with across state, I've been urging the same message. Is if you can sell bonds right now, if your tax capacity allows you to, sell what you can to take advantage of still the relative low interest rates. I'm talking about interest rates going up, but from a historical perspective, rates are still pretty cheap, given a 10, 20, 30-year payback. But they are increasing, and I don't see a slowdown in interest rates going up. It'll likely go up and level off at some point, but right now rates are going up at a pretty good clip. To give you just the example, one thing that we look at our industry is the 10-year Treasury note. And if you look at that 10-year Treasury note, 1 month ago, it was a 1.9% rate. Today, it's 2.65%, so 0.75% higher, which may or may not sound like a lot, but I did the math on a $10 million financing. What that equates to in total interest cost is about $900,000. So it's real money. So I say that with the urging of, I think it is still a good time to get into the market. Again, historically, it's still pretty cheap money, but I wouldn't wait to kind of see how things play out, because I do think rates will continue to go up. So with that said, and again, this chart here is a little, I'm going to scoot over here, is a little convoluted, but walking through it, going from left to right, you sold your $3 million in 2020, so that represents the orange bars there. So right now, the current tax rate is approximately $25 per $100,000 of assessed value. So if you own a home and it's assessed at $100,000, that's $25 per year, or $200,000, that's $50 a year, or whatever the multiple that you're thinking. So that's assessed value and not market value. So somebody who bought their home in 1990, if they're assessed at $100,000, they can sell their home right now for $300,000. They're probably assessed at somewhere between like $150,000 or so, because there's an incremental 2% increase. The way that we lay this program out, again, is essentially a sale every 2 years for approximately $9 million. So for 2022, $8.75 million. That represents the yellow bars. So you see the yellow, it'll take the tax rate up to about $28, then it drops down to allow for a subsequent series of bonds in 2024. So you have the blue bars going out till 2026, and then you'll see a drop. And then the final sale in 2026 is again approximately $9 million, going out another 25 years. I kept the bond program short. Typically in California, any bond sale, you're allowed to sell bonds for a maximum of 40 years. I have never done a 40-year bond sale. I never will. I would say 95% of bonds that are sold are 30-year bonds. I'm contemplating 25-year bonds, again, to keep it short, to keep the interest costs low for the community. And overall, I'm sizing the total bond program for a tax rate not to exceed $28 or so, just to give us margin in case my assumption of the 3.5% growth rate is not correct in any given year. That gives us some wiggle room to stay below that 30. The $30 is what we've committed to voters. So legally, if you did have to collect for any reason above $30 in a given year, The assessor is legally required to make that collection to pay bondholders. But politically, it's not so great, right? So if you tell your voters that we're passing this measure HAs, it's only cost you X, and then a few years later, it costs you more than X, not the best look, not the best in terms of taxpayer community trust. So very long way of saying is that we built a bond program that I think is good for taxpayers, is good for your district to build facilities. I think just is responsible, all in all things considered. Any questions before I go through the timeline? I know a lot of this is different from what you likely hear on a day-to-day basis. So I want to take a second to see if there's any questions. No? Okay. So the first thing I should say about this timeline is it could be sped up, it could be slowed down as much as is needed. So the first thing we do is kick off the financing, and all that is sending out a timeline, a term sheet, terms of what financing you're thinking about, and a distribution list of all the interested parties. Information presentation to the board, that's tonight to answer any questions that you may have. Followed by preparation of legal documentation. So there's another party that we work with called Bond and Disclosure Council. They'll prepare a lot of documents to make sure that the bonds that we sell on the market are a legal, valid tender that bond buyers could hold. So they prepare all that work about a week from tonight. And then on the 27th, the board would consider a bond resolution, and a bond resolution would lay out all the basic terms of the financing, and you'll by proxy approve other related documents. And those other related documents will have blanks in it, and that's intentional because the blanks could not be completed or cannot be completed until the bond sale actually occurs. So what the board would actually be doing is providing or approving the guidance for the financing team to carry out the work, but with terms in that resolution that the board agrees to. It essentially gives your superintendent, your CBO, the capacity to continue the process forward. Again, with kind of the guardrails that you provide in the resolution. Later that week, we would meet with a rating agency, and you're rated by an industry rating firm called Moody's. And currently you're rated AA3, which is a very, very good rating. The ratings work in kind of top hierarchical order. So you go AA, AA1, AA2, AA3. So to be in the AA category is very, very good. So the higher rating that you are, when you sell bonds in a given market, the better interest rates you should receive. And it was nice to see the Davis Demographics rep here, because some of that data that he presented we'll actually use in our rating presentation to give to the analyst. So it was a lot of good information, and I would just kind of echo what he said is I do a bunch of these presentations in school districts across the state. The declining enrollment, this is not unique to you, and we certainly express that in the rating presentations to help make your case. What our job is with the rating agencies is to provide all the highlights of the districts. We talk about your tax base, we talk about your general fund, general economics of the school district, student enrollment, ADA, and that package that we put together is about a 30-page presentation that we work with your superintendent and your CBO to present to the rating company. They'll then assign a grade. And what we see it based on early just kind of review of your economics of the district, keeping that AA3, that very high rating. So we would expect that in the first week of May. Yes.
Just for more normal speak, that I might, because this is all new to me.
Sure.
Kind of like a credit score idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So
Because better credit score gets me better interest rate, gets me more ability to borrow.
correct. Yeah, that's exactly
Same
right.
thing, we're just talking rating.
Yep, exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly right. You got it.
Just making sure.
Yep, you got it. So once we see that rating, we will what's called post the preliminary official statement, or POS for short. And all that is is a legal document that investors will review to make a decision. Do we buy your bonds or not? It's kind of like a stock prospectus, but it's a stock prospectus for your district's credit. And we work with the attorneys to make sure that document is full and complete. That way we can start marketing to investors throughout the state, actually throughout the country, of who may be interested in buying your bonds. We have in here the board meets to prioritize projects. So by that time, by the 17th or shortly thereafter, based on your project priority, we'll know what the total amount of bonds that you may need for the particular sale.
I
Yes.
have a question in regards to that.
Mhm.
Yes, I made notes on that one. What are gonna be, I'm just supporting what Mrs. Sarmiento was saying about what's gonna be the level of engagement between May 11 and May 17 about principals and teachers on how this can be prioritized before coming to us.
Sure.
So there will be time to do that, or, because I know this is very restricted and limited time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, again, this timeline can speed up or slow down as much as that you need. And I think a point that I should make clear is with the district board approval, let's assume that you, right now tonight, you think you need $9 million in total bond funding. What we can do in the resolution is set a higher amount, because we can always work down. So we can say $11 million approval, but through the work that you do through your meetings based on needs, we can always work down. So if we say $11 million and it's only be $9 million, that $2 million we don't use just goes back in the pot. The taxpayers aren't taxed on that, on the money that we don't sell. You keep that authorization. But if you still need more time to prioritize, to figure out what you truly need, certainly this timeline can be extended as much as needed. With the board approval, theoretically on the 27th, we can set some high bars and then always work down based on what the actual needs are.
Yeah, do we have capacity to just collect input, walkthroughs? I don't know, what is the best recommendation on that part? So will be something to consider that part. Because, we have eyes on the school, and not necessarily us, but the students or the teachers or the principals. I don't know, what is the best recommendation for that part?
So I think we have to prioritize our projects, but we don't have to have architectural drawings and exact numbers and full input. We just have to have an idea of what we want to try to accomplish, which we started that conversation today, so that we know how much to then get authorization for, so that we can start marketing and trying to sell that and get that liquid cash. So really, I think it would come down to how conservative or how fast do you want us to start doing those projects? And again, we would be seeking input kind of simultaneously to these things. So you're authorizing that we're going to move forward with accessibility projects, but those details will flesh out. It doesn't have to be by that date.
Right. Correct.
Yeah, thank you. So this is an estimate of the ideal timeline. Okay, thank you.
Like in the perfect world, if we started right now and we went forward, it doesn't make us, we're not binding ourselves to these dates.
Okay.
Yeah, no, to use a
Or the time.
like a very extreme example, because the market of the past few weeks has been so hectic with the inflation issues, with the war. It was the second time in, 21 years that I've had multiple bond sales that we entered the market and they didn't finish because of all the uncertainty. Bond buyers just weren't interested in buying bonds. So we just stopped the sale and pushed off to another time. So you have that much flexibility. You are not tied to anything in terms of tax repayment, paying professionals, anything until the bond pricing actually concludes and the bonds close. So you have ultimate flexibility for this. All the resolution does, again, is set the basic parameters. And I've had bond sales that a board approved on April 27th. Something would come up, we wouldn't sell till August 27th. So you have complete flexibility with this timeline. This is what I would just say is typical in a typical market. But again, we can always adjust as is needed.
Thank you.
But assuming that again, the typical timeline, pricing on May 18th, and all that is selling the bonds. So we enter the bond market, and the bond sale is kind of like an auction. So, we'd say to you, we'll offer you the 2025 bond at 3%, and you come and say, I want it at 2.5%. I really want that bond. So the best bond wins. So we go through that bond pricing. Once the bonds are sold, or once the pricing occurs, the bonds aren't technically sold until your superintendent signs what's called a bond purchase contract. So if there's anything throughout the bond sale, the process that the superintendent doesn't like, she simply doesn't sign that bond purchase agreement. Once a bond purchase agreement is signed, that's when the bonds are technically sold. So after that, there's about a 2-week period where we dot our I's, cross our T's from a legal financial perspective, and we would have the bond closing on June 1st. At bond closing, bond funds are sent to your account held at the county, and you have the proceeds at that time, from which then you can start making requisition requests for whatever projects that you would do. So it's not on our hands necessarily. Everything is sent to the county, it's held at the county, to be drawn upon once is needed.
Any additional questions? I just have a question. If we haven't spent our previous bond monies, why would we be interested, or why should we go out and sell more bonds?
That's solely based on project need. So if there's not a need, the answer would be you wouldn't. Or further, if you're not certain you can spend that 85% in 3 years, you would wait. So what we typically see is if there's bonds already out there, money's being spent, is that there's a reasonable assumption that projects coming up, that what you have out there as far as funding doesn't cover what is needed in the next 6 months, year, 18 months, 3 years. So that would be the only reason, and that's solely your call. From a financial perspective, again, I think rates will continue to rise. The Fed has said as much. So in terms of saving taxpayer interest dollars, it's better to get into the market now than it likely is 6 months from now. But if you don't need or can't spend the money, then that's also true. You don't need or can't spend it.
So when we went for the 3 million, we had a lot of leaky roofs, as you remember, and we wanted to make sure we were able to fix those roofs. And we had a few other projects that we had identified. The pandemic was really problematic. It was difficult to do the whole bidding process, do the bid walks. So we moved pretty slow during the pandemic, but now that things are starting to open up and we're seeing that we need to kind of get in line with the labor for construction, we've discussed what our project needs are, and we came up with what we thought was reasonable, with a reasonable timeline to kind of get the conversation started tonight that Mr. Castillo and Mr. Avanesians presented. And then we did ask our bond advisor to give us recommendations based on what we were able to think was reasonable and present to you. So yes, we have some money left over, but that was really because of the pandemic and our inability to spend it as fast as possible. And the roofs, we did prioritize roofs, but we still have some more to go on our main building.
Any additional questions? Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And a lot of valuable information. It just kind of.
It's a lot, I know.
This one?
That's yours, yes,
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing you again.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. And with that, we will now adjourn this meeting. Good night.
Thank you all. We'll see you Monday morning, 7:30. We appreciate you. Thank you. And thank you for making that accommodation. We apologize for not making that one of the suggestions.